episode 79, in which Matthew responds to a Christian podcast on the subject, How to Talk to an Atheist. The video I am responded to is fronted by Christian Tim Hall, who I had a chat with in episode 72. I disagree with Tim on many things, and we regularly engage in discussion on the Unbelievable Facebook group. But I like and respect Tim, and so I feel that this is an episode of his podcast that I should engage with and respond to. The link to the original video is in the show notes, which was recorded in May 2021. If you search YouTube for Unapologetic, you will find Tim covering many subjects with his pastor co-host Bobby Conway. Before publishing this episode, I sent a copy to Tim to give him an option to listen and respond back, or to object to anything that I have said. Tim was very gracious and thanked me. He also did not ask for any edits to be made. Tim and Bobby touch on mental health awareness in the intro. Here is what they say.
But if people show back up to church and they just hear from the pulpit, all of their problems is just their sin, and that's it.
Yeah.
We're being way too myopic. Sure, the fall has caused our mental health problems, but we need to help people to understand that they have to be put back together.
The past 2 years of pandemic have certainly been problematic for many, and this has exacerbated mental health issues for some. This should not be ignored, and church can certainly play a part in the recovery. The casual blaming of this being rooted in the fall is where I have a problem. The Christian doctrine of pointing to the fall as the root cause of all of humanity's woes is one reason why I don't like Christianity. It contributes towards painting a picture of humans being bad by default. The idea that we can't do anything worthwhile or good unless we first submit to the Christian God comes from this idea of the fall being the fault of all things. This oversimplifies the difficulty and causes of mental health issues. These issues can be genetic, they can be chemical, and they can be situational. Sometimes medication is required to resolve them, and sometimes prolonged counselling is required to help the sufferer get out of bad mental habits. To point to the fall as a source of mental health issues and neglect to mention or acknowledge the various causes is a serious misstep, and why I continue to speak out against the Christianity I used to believe. But this isn't what the episode is about. It's about how to talk to atheists. So let's leave the mental health to the professionals. See link 1 in the show notes and move on to talking to atheists.
We can define atheism in a number of different ways, but it seems like the dominant way that particularly people on the internet that call themselves atheists are defining themselves are just they lack a belief in God. And whether that is an active, I don't believe in God, or whether that is just, I have yet to be convinced by any evidence that any Christian has put forth.
It's definitely useful to be aware of the position of the atheist you are speaking to. While I do affirm that I'm atheist because, having tried to engage with evidence for God, I find myself no longer able to believe a God exists. I also take the view that there are aspects of Christianity that are harmful, toxic, or dangerous, and so should not be part of any belief system. So for the Christian wanting to talk to me, not being aware of those things could result in a very unproductive conversation.
One thing that we need to understand with atheism, it's not one size fits all.
Yes, this is true.
But a true atheist is one who does not believe that God created this world that we live in.
Right.
There is no such thing as a true atheist. It's an unhelpful designator. I can understand why Christians would use this word, because you see the phrase true Christian thrown around an awful lot when talking about deconverts. In this context, a true Christian is one who adheres to a preferred or approved set of Christian beliefs. But there are no atheist beliefs. There is no atheist creed. Atheism is not a belief structure, and so the phrase true atheist is baggage laden. And for many, myself included, this will most certainly hinder your ability to have a constructive conversation with me. Yes, I get that the point was about not believing that the world we live in was created by God. I don't believe that. But notice that this wasn't the first thing I heard in that clip. The first thing I heard was true atheist. That rings alarm bells about how the Christian views atheists. And before I can engage with what the Christian says next, I need to first unpack why they need to use the word true. Better to simply not say it in the first place and avoid having to explain yourself.
They believe that we are basically functioning, we're dancing to the tune of our DNA,
right,
as Richard Dawkins said.
Believe is a problematic word when used to describe the effect DNA has on our behaviours. We actually have demonstrable knowledge of how DNA affects how our lives play out. So while technically the word belief does apply in a linguistic sense, it is not the same meaning as belief when applied to the Christian belief that the world was created by a God. This is another point of difficulty when Christians and atheists have conversations. Be careful of using a word like belief in contexts where the meaning might be misunderstood or your intended meaning might not be the same meaning as your conversation partner takes. All beliefs are not equal. When the word belief can cover a multitude of things, it is actually a hindrance to better dialogue. Use a different word, one that has less baggage and better definitional usefulness. This is how we improve our conversations.
What that looks like is everything kind of popped into existence out of nothing.
Everything popped into existence out of nothing. Oh boy. Remember, this is an episode titled How to Talk to an Atheist. Yet this representation of the hard work of cosmologists, some of whom are theists, sounds mocking. Why should I, an atheist, take the time to talk with you, when before we've even had the conversation, you prejudge what I believe and characterise it in such an unhelpful and inaccurate way? In what world is this level of representation of those you wish to have dialogue with ever going to produce fruit? This is equivalent to me telling a Christian they believe in a sky daddy, and then expecting to have a reasonable conversation. It ain't gonna happen. Dear Christians, if you want to have a good conversation with me, do not ever express what you think I believe to anyone. Ask me first, and then check with me that you've understood.
It's not one size fits all, and it's not monolithic.
No, atheism is not one size fits all, and it's not monolithic. So either bit about the true atheist and that everything popped into existence out of nothing when you know and intend to say that atheists are varied. Maybe I can let the earlier missteps slide. Let's move on.
If we're going to be thoughtful, we need to just be inquisitive in our relationships. And I think that's where you really begin to build relationships anyway. So you don't believe in God. Well, talk to me about that.
Inquisitive is good. I like inquisitive. And yes, I'll even tell you why I don't believe in your God, if you ask me. And I'll probably ask you why you believe in your God, and what aspects of Christianity you accept and which ones you reject. I am very happy to have those conversations. But where I draw the line is you trying to tell me that I need to change my position and align myself with your beliefs. Evangelizing is not talking. Trying to convert me is not getting to know me. Do not do that. I am not interested. It will not go well.
You might find that there's atheists that are professed atheists. They don't even understand their own atheism.
Right.
Like, oh, well, did you know that atheists don't have a soul?
Atheists don't understand their own atheism. But as we heard earlier, atheism isn't monolithic. There is no creed. It's just a non-belief in a God, or belief there is no God if you prefer. The soul part doesn't come into it. There are atheists who have beliefs around a soul and the afterlife. These are not uniquely Christian things. Be very careful of prescribing what the atheist does or does not believe.
What we want to be able to do with our conversations is get them to help us to understand where they are at, and then we'll kind of know what we're up against.
Understanding is important, and good conversations will assist that. But why is this useful advice immediately after something that is unhelpful? Yes, I want to help Christians understand where I come from, and why I take the positions that I do. but I am also not going to tolerate being told what I do or should believe. You do not get to do that. If you can't listen fully, then I will not be fully patient with you. It really is that simple. Also, do not view a conversation with me as learning what you are up against. That is battle talk. Is your motive for talking to me a chance for you to prepare yourself for the next conversation in which you then attempt to counter all the things I say? Is my value to you really that shallow? If you can't be with me and have a conversation with me simply for the pleasure of my company, then don't bother. I will not be your project.
The biggest dividing line in a lot of atheist Christian conversations is kind of the way we know things. What we agree is evidence.
I don't know if it's the biggest dividing line, but it certainly is a big dividing line. Those who have listened to episode 72 will have heard me in conversation with Tim, and we do go a little in circles over evidence. Tim puts more weight on philosophical argument, while I feel the conclusions those arguments come to still need to be put to a reliable test process before being accepted. The baseline issue here is that I view evidence as something that can be tested outside of my own capacity to think. While many Christians feel it's acceptable to devise a philosophical argument that arrives at their preferred conclusion and declare that result as evidence. Arguments are not evidence, and it is a mistake to list arguments for God in response to the atheist who says there isn't convincing evidence. When the arguments that convince you do not convince someone else, then that should be a clue to the effectiveness of the argument. Try something else. Engage with why the atheist isn't convinced. Don't tell them that they're wrong to be unconvinced. That's not productive.
If you're going to treat history in the way that you have arrived at this conclusion by deconstructing it to the point that he never existed, are you willing to do that with all history? If not, why not?
This is from a section where Tim and Bobby are talking about Jesus mythicism. It's easy to get the impression from this section that Tim and Bobby hold to a view that the only possible alternative to Jesus mythicism is that everything written about Jesus is true. But it's not that binary. There are other options. It is perfectly valid to accept that there was someone called Jesus who existed, and that the stories of his life have been mythicized to the point where it's now impossible to know which bits are actually true. Now, I'm sure Tim and Bobby don't hold the binary view, but by taking aim at the most extreme view, they have stepped over the far more likely alternative options that the majority of atheists will fall into. When talking to atheists, take the time to learn what they think. Don't automatically argue against what you think is the weakest possible position, as though that will somehow get them to align with your thinking. It won't. Atheists treat the Bible the same way they treat other, equivalent historical religious narratives, with heavy skepticism. It's a religious text. Of course it will have been edited and embellished. It's ridiculous to think otherwise. So it is entirely reasonable and rational to question everything that is fantastical. It's the Christians who treat the Bible as divinely inspired and inerrant that are treating it as superior to other historic material. The question isn't, why do atheists doubt the Bible so much? The question is, why do Christians view it so highly?
We both have this problem, and kind of to get them to agree to some of that and say which worldview best explains this thing that we're both looking at. Whether what worldview best explains our feeling of wrongness of something. What worldview best explains the laws of logic or the existence of the universe in the first place.
I do not recommend the worldview gambit that Tim is alluding to here. In fact, I would go so far as to say it's a dishonest tactic, because it ignores the fact that not all worldviews are equal, and it ignores the fact that worldviews can, and do, invoke methods and actions which cannot be validated or demonstrated. For example, I could take the worldview that Jesus was a time-travelling magician. This could very easily explain everything written about him in the Gospels. He took advantage of a superstitious society and presented himself as having godlike powers. I could very easily explain everything attributed to Jesus as being a magician. Or maybe the universe was created by a trickster god, a god that likes to see its creations suffer. After all, only evil deities demand absolute allegiance on pain of death. In fact, I find the evil God idea far more convincing than the Christian God. Using the worldview gambit means I just need to invent something that explains the world in a way that I find comforting. But that does not get me any closer to actually explaining how reality came to be. The worldview gambit invites you to bypass critical thinking and ignore evidence. This is why it is dishonest and should be rejected outright. The only viable option is to do the hard work of gathering what evidence is available, and then continually testing it so as to gain an understanding that is not influenced by your preferences. This is why we have the scientific method. Yes, this does mean that we have to live with not knowing some things. But I'd rather say I don't know than take a worldview that won't permit itself to be wrong.
It's a theory, evolution. We talk about it as if like that's just this perfect story that has no falsity whatsoever. That's a theory.
Uh-oh. This is a problem. This is a very big problem. Saying this to a scientific literate atheist is guaranteed to lose respect. The statement that evolution is a theory, in the context of casting doubt on it, utterly misunderstands how theory is used in a scientific context. In colloquial language, it's common to use theory as a random idea that has little or no support. However, this is not what is meant by a scientific theory. A scientific theory is an explanation for observed phenomena. For example, if I lift my computer mouse off my desk and let go, it falls back onto the desk. This is an observed phenomena that is not unique to my location. You too can do this and observe the same result. The theory of gravity is how scientists think that happens. This theory is put into practice when calculating satellite orbits. The theory of evolution is the current explanation of the observed phenomena of species changing over time. Yes, the theory could change, but that change does not invalidate the observed phenomena. Change means better observations have been gathered, and so the theory has improved to accommodate them. Using theory as a criticism of evolution betrays a poor understanding of the scientific method, and demonstrates why there are Christians who elevate worldview thinking over evidence. In fact, I'm going to go further and suggest that using theory as a criticism when it comes to evolution reveals a blinkered mindset that will struggle to talk effectively to atheists.
We can have a friendship with people that view things differently. And, we need to recognize the importance of pursuing people, and we ought to make sure that people don't feel used by us.
Yes, you can, but only if you commit to not trying to force your thinking onto them. But you need to accept the risk that being with people who view things differently might expose the errors in your own thinking. Are you prepared to change your thinking? You have been listening to a podcast from Reason Press. Do you have any thoughts on what you've just heard? Do you have a topic that you would like us to cover? Please send all feedback to reasonpress@gmail.com. You might even appear on an episode. Our theme music was written for us by Holly. To hear more of her music, see the links in our show notes.